Welcome to Krome Cast. Take it out. I'm Sam Major, Commercial Director of Krome Technologies, and I'm back once again on the sofa with Rupert Mills, my co-founder.
Hi Sam.
We're here to talk about the evolution of everything as a service, which I'm sure you'll agree is certainly what we're seeing in the industry with this move to consumption-based consumerisation of IT. We're seeing it, I won't say forced upon us, but there's been this kind of paradigm shift in the market from buy it as a depreciating asset and run it over X amount of years, then potentially sweat your asset and then large capital outlay into refresh. And we've had that for many, many years. And now we're seeing people actually trying to move from that capital expenditure into an operational expenditure. And we've seen it with, obviously, the first big push was really Azure, G-Cloud, AWS, and that push to let's put everything in the cloud, rightly or wrongly from a cost saving perspective, but advantages depend on what type of business you are. And I guess now we've seen that develop over the years. It'd be interesting to see what your thoughts are, as you're kind of more deeply involved in the coalface than I am, and some of the lessons learned that we've seen, both in large enterprise and SME, of people in this move. I guess let's start with the kind of cloud model, but then what we're seeing today with it as desktop as a service and security as a service and everything as a service.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to why people are making that move. It is just a change in the way businesses budget for the future, the way businesses finance themselves. It's the same way that cars have moved from you going to buy a car and own a car to most people these days, almost everybody leases a car and it's all about the monthly payment. You're home shopping. You don't go to HMV anymore and buy a DVD. You subscribe to Netflix and you own a subscription to Netflix. And what that subscription to Netflix does for you over buying a DVD is it means that you have access to a whole bunch of films instead of the one film you bought, but you never actually own anything. And there are advantages and disadvantages to both sides, pros and cons to both sides. And that's really a lot where IT is moving. So historically, if you take the real basics of, let's say, Microsoft Office, you'd have bought your Office licenses and you'd have owned Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc.
With the paper license stuffed in the drawer somewhere.
Yeah, paper license lost somewhere and nobody able to find them when you need them. But yeah, absolutely, you'd have owned that Office license and it was your decision whether or not you basically said, I'm going to refresh that every time they come out with a new Office 2000 or Office whatever it was, and you move forwards in your versions.
We certainly saw people sit on, obviously with software assurance you could do that, and every 3 years, blah blah. We certainly saw people sitting on, I won't name names, but it's a legal firm, and I'm sure you know who I mean, who were sat on a very, very old version of Word that then became almost 10 years old and wouldn't operate with other things, etc. But really sweated that asset, which probably not sensible actually given what they did.
Yeah, I that's it. Ultimately, that was the older operating model, and I think the world has changed in as much as security policies, all the various different systems you need to keep up to date, the interaction between other people in the world. So in those early days of Office, you bought your old version of Office and you owned it, and if you owned that for 7, 8, 9, 10 years and you didn't upgrade it, that was fine. But the real problem started coming about when you started getting emailed files by people who were using newer versions of Office, and they'd send you generation ahead and your version of Office wouldn't open it. Yep. So that forced your hand into the upgrade. And that was kind of the early days of, okay, things are now keeping up with the rest of the world is becoming important.
Yeah.
In the latter times, security has made that a massive issue. Is actually, if you don't keep things secure, you don't keep up with where we are. So people start moving from this, okay, I'm going to buy it once every 5, 10 years, to I'm going to buy it every 3 years because that's what's necessary. And then it's if I'm buying it every 3 years, instead of depreciating it over 3 years, why don't I move it into an operational expenditure and budget for it? Just because I'm buying it every 3 years anyway.
Lease it.
And you're essentially leasing it like a car or your Netflix, or your mobile phone. Yeah, absolutely.
That's where I think people are most familiar with when you start talking about different models. And I've certainly seen them talking to customers, and you'll get a pushback. We don't like finance.
Yeah.
And you can show them it'll be cheaper over time, whatever it is. But if you actually make it akin to, do you have a mobile phone? Yes, I do. And actually, what do you pay for that from a phone? If you can talk about actually consuming IT in that way, it's a really easy way for people to associate that model.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and as we said, that has advantages and disadvantages. What people often fail to realise is you can do it with any kind of infrastructure. You can do it with your historics and your new cloud infrastructure. You can do it across the board. Everybody will offer you that option in some way, shape or form. I mean, we can offer a desktop as a service offering now, so you don't buy a desktop.
Yeah.
You can have a desktop from us. It'll cost you X per month, and then ultimately you make sure that your desktop isn't more than 4 years old or 5 years old, whatever we set the contract up as, and it's got the latest software on it. And you just pay a fee for it every month in the same way as you pay for Office 365 or Netflix.
Yeah.
So all of these things coming together, I think, have moved the IT model on into that method of spend.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. There's some things that personally I think lend really well to be put into that model. There's other areas, and it's my personal opinion, I'm sure some of our audience would disagree with me, but personally, and we've had discussions with people that spend phenomenal amounts of money on cloud, and there was a big push to let's put everything in the cloud because, as you said, it's forecastable. We can burst up, we can burst down. There's load of flexibility, but when you really start to dig into some of those numbers, it can become very expensive. I'm not saying it's not right for certain people and certain businesses, but I think you've really got to do the analysis to understand, is that right for us, them, as a business, and the right application for it? Because desktop as a service, we've modeled that many times, and you can show that it's actually cheaper than buying a capital asset and putting the wraparound service to bundle it all up. When you start looking at putting all of your data, your tier 1 services and everything else into the cloud, and you start doing that cost calculation versus on-prem, etc., as well as I do, some of those numbers can be quite scary.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things. I was talking to a client just yesterday about this, and their conversation was, we want a cloud-first strategy. I said, absolutely, have a cloud-first strategy, but look at the cost implications of having that. So the first remit for you is you want to decrease your management cost, your IT overhead cost for running your IT. So a cloud-first strategy absolutely means that other people are taking care of part of the infrastructure, part of the service, and it decreases your management overhead. But from a cost perspective, you also need to look at what it's doing to your business and saying, are we paying a stupid premium for that, or are we paying the right premium for it, or is it actually cheaper? Yeah. And in certain circumstances. So actually my recommendation was, okay, look at a hybrid model. Look at, okay, these things, Office 365, back to that point again, absolute no-brainer.
Absolutely.
Put it in the cloud, unless you're in a very specific set of circumstances. We have one particular client who has mining operations all over the globe.
We mentioned before, I think, if you're in that sort of area where connectivity and so on's a real struggle.
Yeah, that Office 365 can be tricky in those scenarios. Which
but
is
generally.
Yeah, absolutely. But and we've got actually other similar clients who have similar challenges, but as a general rule of thumb, Office 365 is almost a no-brainer. It is it's your Amazon Prime, your Netflix. It's a very common subscription. Whereas something like, I don't know, let's say your finance system. There are some really good finance systems in the cloud these days, and there are some really good reasons to keep it on-prem. So think about, what does it tie into? What does it link to? What are the costs of running it? And how does that work? Sometimes the right decision will be absolutely put it in the cloud. Let's do that. It's the right way to do it. Or sometimes the right decision will be put it on-prem. But from your finance perspective, you can run it either way, because you can make it an operational expenditure on-prem if you wanted to, or in the cloud. The one option you don't generally have is CapEx in the cloud, although you can future purchase. So if you want a CapEx in the cloud, you can buy a 3-year contract and an advance buy on that sort of stuff as well. So really, I said it's the one option you don't have, but I suppose you do.
Interesting. Yeah, like you say, it comes down, it is horses for courses, and I suppose that's our job as an MSP to work with the customer and understand which bits go where.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I look at again how the market's going, hence this conversation, and we've seen a couple of big vendors now have really pushed forward their everything as a service.
Yeah.
And I'm just cautious, if I'm honest with you. I'm wondering how they're going to execute that well. I think there'll be some very large enterprises, but we'll get a lot of focus and we'll execute quite well. I look at the scale of some of these guys, personal opinion, wonder how they're going to adapt to do that in an SME to smaller enterprise market and actually execute that properly.
I think if you have a background conversation with a lot of those vendors, a lot of them recognise that although they're marketing the service out there, they're only really interested in the people above a certain size, because that's where they can really capitalise, and they're expecting partners to pick up their people under a certain size and have a similar alternative service that will deal with that, because they don't have the ability to drop down to that scale as opposed to some of the customers not reach up to the scale that's interesting to the vendor. But it's that whole thing is very similar to the historical sort of outsource insource conversation. You've got that conversation where people have said, right, I'm going to show a cost saving by outsourcing, and they outsource everything, and then the next CIO through the door says, actually, I'm going to show a cost saving by insourcing, and actually what it is a transitional change happening from time to time where people take I want to show a change, so I want to show a shift, and cloud has just become another word for outsourcing, or OPEX, everything as a service, just another word for outsourcing. And I do wonder in the future whether or not we'll see some people moving back, but part of the challenge with that is the big vendors, and they've moved their business models to that way. So I think
they're pushing hard to keep them locked into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the IT model has transitioned in that direction. There'll be some challenges to not come back, but you start seeing terms like edge computing floated around now, which cloud computing, great, and then people start saying edge computing. So what you mean is having a computer back in your office again, and all these various different terms. It really is a one size doesn't fit all. No. You need to find the right solution for the right client, and that's where it comes down to having the right advice.
Yeah, it's interesting talk on
doing your research.
Doing your research, obviously. We talk about outsourcing, excuse me, and we've obviously seen it before. We've been doing this long enough to see big businesses outsource, insource, outsource again, and then come back. And you are right, it's always kind of new broom, show a cost saving, but I think when you look at it over time, it isn't necessarily the right way of doing it. And I think it's just because one person comes in potentially with an agenda. I think if you look at it from the broader basis of being the right thing to do, I think it does. You're obviously right. It needs that analysis. We need to look at with our customers what parts should you consume. 365 obviously is a no-brainer. Using the cloud, I think, is a no-brainer, but for the right things. Putting your backup in the cloud, that's a great idea. I think putting certain systems in the cloud, depending on what dependencies have, is a great idea. But when you start doing the kind of cost and efficiencies models, there is still very much we're pro-hybrid. Yeah, we are. Because, we've done this enough to look at the financial models and the operational efficiencies, and actually that's kind of where it sits. It's interesting, and you are right. You touched on. I wasn't going to necessarily mention some of the stuff we know from the vendors, but you are right. I think they're cognizant of the fact they know where they can play well and where they're weak, and that's definitely where people of our kind of size and capability can step in and help. Businesses are looking to leverage as a service, but actually get it right, so it's not a poor investment. If you're going to do it and actually make the most of it, you've got to measure it, kind of measure twice, cut once, right, and actually get it right, because if you get it wrong, it is expensive. You are locked into a contract of a certain duration, because you have to be, to make the service work, especially things like desktop as a service.
Discounting schemes and all the rest of it.
Exactly, and the residual values of the hardware and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. It has to be a decent sized contract for the business to actually to make it work. So you've got to get the due diligence done up front, from our side, from their side. They've got to research the market to make sure they're working with the right partners. So it's going to be really interesting, I think, to see how this evolves over the next 5 years, and whether it just goes completely, changes completely, a bit like outsourcing and insourcing, everyone grabs everything back and does it themselves. I don't think it will go that way. I think it'll be like you say, certain things too far. Coming out of 365, if you can use it, there's no good reason to.
No.
If you're using a good cloud backup system, I can't think of a good reason to then bring that back on site and go back to disk to tape and all that sort of stuff. It makes no sense. But like I say, we have seen let's all go all cloud. Yeah. Retreat, let's go hybrid. So I'm just interested to see where, and obviously interested in your opinion, this kind of next 5 years, is that long enough? Do you think it will settle down in that period?
I think probably. I think there's I think it depends on how you define settled down. I think the push in the IT industry has always been for innovation. Innovation is what brings new vendors to the market, and new vendors bring money into the IT industry. So the IT industry focuses on pushing everything forwards because that's where they make their money. Yeah. We're not going to lie, ultimately we move forwards because people change their systems. Yeah. Supporting things and looking after things is definitely part of what we do, but the big project transformations are where ultimately the big vendors see their revenue and ultimately where we see revenue. So at the end of the day, that transformation is there. The question really is whether or not that transformation delivers an ROI for your business. If it delivers an ROI for your business in the next 5 years, which things like O365 will, then do it. Absolutely, it makes sense. But analyse it for the right reasons rather than it's the latest, shiniest new toy, and buy what's right for your business.
We've definitely seen some of that.
Yeah. been guilty of it ourselves. But it's
very true.
it's what's the right thing. I think we've been doing this for long enough now to work out that okay, it's about what's right for the business, and what's right for business A may not be what's right for business B as well. It's about individual analysis of what's right.
Yeah. You can't force a square peg for a round hole, right? So
No.
and I guess that's, again, we've talked about this on the podcast before, but doing things like requirement definition workshops, RDWs and whatnot, working with the customer to understand not just the technology stack, but how the business operates, how they make their money, what they do, etc., and weighing all that up. And then you can offer advice from an intelligent, educated position to actually get that right and ensure that whatever they're doing, and you are right, I talk about 5 years in IT, like, not a lot will happen. We could see huge amounts of innovation.
Yeah.
We could be to a singular device. I know that was put around before. We'd all have a mobile phone that you dock, and that becomes your laptop, your keyboard, and everything. We could well be there. We may not, but there could be other radical changes in the next 5 years that we'll all have to adapt to. And whatever cost consumption model fits that will be which way the market goes, right?
If you go back to the late 90s, and they were predicting that they basically within 5 years you wouldn't have PCs on your desk anymore. In the late 90s, everything was going to be a web-enabled machine. You do everything in a browser. Actually, here we are 25 odd years later, and you are starting to do pretty much everything in a browser these days. Everything's becoming, but you still got a PC on your desk or a laptop. And again, take COVID, that whole change that's happened of actually all these people that went to work and sat at a desktop. A lot of those businesses have had to say, actually, we'll adopt a more agile work method by using notebooks, laptops these days, and allowing people to work from home. That's been a massive change that no one would have looked at necessarily 5 years ago and predicted, because no one could have predicted COVID. You never know what's coming out in this way.
Hopefully not that again.
But but some of those very confident predictions, the very confident prediction from Larry Ellison, I can't quote it exactly, but was that the world of the many thousands of pounds PC was going to go because he was going to create these web boxes. Now that didn't actually happen, but then he claimed success because he said, well, the price of PCs come down, so I've
shifted the market.
I've shifted the market and I've done what I intended to do.
Thanks, Larry.
So you can look at that either way. It was a success in one way, or it wasn't in another. But either way, we're still using PCs that many years later. Yeah, I'll see you here in 5 years' time. We can do another one of these podcasts and look back and see what was a success and what wasn't from what we're talking about. But
we'll see flying cars outside the window, hopefully.
Yeah, we'll see.
Brilliant. Thanks for joining me. And thank you for joining us in this edition of Krome Cast. Take it out. Remember to like, comment, subscribe and share. And if there's anything you'd like to cover on future episodes, then leave it in the comment section below. Thanks.